Bună seara, doamnelor, bună seara, domnilor! Sunt Marius Constantinescu, iar dumneavoastră vă aflați la Vizual, magazinul dumneavoastră de cadouri culturale de pe TVR3 și TVRplus.ro. Cadouri pe care astăzi eu doar le ambalez, pentru că ele vin de la colegele mele Andreea Duță și Magdalena Stanciu. Cel mai recent proiect al artistei Cosmina Nicolescu, alias Fandaxia, se numește Pălăria Spaniolă și prezintă 16 pălării inspirate de tablouri celebre din pictura spaniolă sau pictura latinoamericană. Proiectul a fost prezentat împreună cu Institutul Cervantes din București și va avea o continuare în momentul în care Timișoara va deveni capitală culturală europeană. Un reportaj de Magdalena Stanciu.
Institutul Cervantes a făcut o invitație extrem de onorantă, aceea de a crea o expoziție de pălării care să onoreze relațiile culturale româno-spaniole, 130 de ani de relații culturale între România și Spania. Lucrul acesta m-a pus tare pe gânduri, oare cum aș putea să ridic totuși un meșteșug la nivel de expoziție. Și ideea mai veche a mea despre pălăriile din tablouri și mai ales despre cum tu poți deveni capodoperă absorbind tabloul respectiv. Prin urmare, am căutat o listă cât mai completă de calități ale culturii spaniole care să regăsească în anumite tablouri cu pălării. Pălăria din tablou să transmită exact acel cuvânt că ne lipsea din declarația de dragoste proprie pe care am făcut-o culturii spaniole. Atunci când ajung în muzeu, încerc să port un dialog cu capodopera pe care o văd. Și acest exercițiu sportiv îl recomand tuturor. Dacă te întâlnești cu un Velázquez, ar fi bine să îl întrebi câte ceva. Să nu-l lași să treacă pe lângă tine sau să ai doar admirație mută. S-ar putea să nu-i convină nici lui. Exact ca un zugrav care intră într-un muzeu, am intrat și eu în muzeul virtual, pentru că, din păcate, nu am văzut toate capodoperele despre care am vorbit în expoziție. Am identificat capodopere care ar putea să spună, prin felul în care este pictată, reprezentată pălăria, să transmită mai multe mesaje despre acea cultură. Și asta a fost senzațional, nu știam pe toți, a fost o perioadă de cercetare în care am descoperit și perle și lucruri senzaționale și pictorii minunați, cum este Remedios Varo. Pentru mine a fost o descoperire pregătind această expoziție, o doamnă minunată, o pictoriță suprarealistă. Este o pictoriță exilului. Lucrul acesta se vede în tablourile ei și creația ei suprarealistă este cumva, pare o lume ideală și o lume care nu are absolut nicio legătură cu realitatea înconjurătoare, din care nu lipsesc pălăriile, care sunt absolut fanteziste, uriașe, mari, necomplexate, chiar învăluie cu totul, sunt mantii, sunt armuri, au diverse roluri și desigur că m-a cucerit.
Ai simțit totuși nevoia să faci o schimbare cromatică, acea culoare care ne vine evident în minte când spunem Spania, a devenit pălăria inspirată în condițiile în care ea nu are astfel de culori vii.
Da, am lucrat, era evident că trebuia folosit roșu. În primul rând, toată expoziția e un fel de plecăciune în fața culturii spaniole. Și dacă primul cuvânt care îți vine în minte este înflăcărat, pasional, flamboiant și roșu trebuia folosit. Apoi am lucrat cu alb și cu negru, iarăși negru pentru că este pălăria de sărbătoare a spaniolului din costumul tradițional și albul din motive evidente pentru că există la o astfel de cultură cu atât de mult idealism, adică acolo este Cervantes. Albul este cumva o culoare care o caracterizează. Lumea se așteaptă să fie o expoziție de pălării care duc cu gândul la Spania la modul concret. Și există exemple, cum ar fi pălăria Panama, care este cumva inclusă în expoziție pentru că am simțit că stratul ei multicultural trebuie cumva susținut și expus. În expoziție se regăsește o pălărie ușor de recunoscut, pălăria de sărbătoare, pe care am preluat-o dintr-o serie pictată de Sorolla pentru Societatea Hispanică Americană de la New York. Este o muncă colosală, acolo sunt 240 de metri pătrați de pictură, în care sunt reprezentate diverse provincii ale Spaniei, de obicei în haine tradiționale și momente de sărbătoare sau de festivitate. Iar pălăria neagră simplă, cu calotă dreaptă, este ceva iconic.
Este această pălărie rotundă despre care vorbeai și în același timp realizezi când vezi expoziția că da, mai există o imagine care te duce imediat cu gândul la Spania, deși acest gen de, să zicem, cagule se purtau mai peste tot în Evul Mediu, dar în Spania ele continuă să existe și au devenit un fel de imagine a religiozității Spaniei.
Da, este vorba de gluga, așa am numit-o în atelier, în termeni prietenești. Este pălăria devoțiunii, care îmbracă cu totul silueta. Atunci când nu porți pălăria, ci ești în interiorul ei. Această pălăria devoțiunii, care este dedicată lui Zurbaran, pictorul absolut al devoțiunii, Zurbaran era atât de restrictiv și atât de minunat și atât de nu mă abat de la calea mea, eu pictez doar călugări în rugăciune în momentul acela de asceză. În Spania, în ceremoniile actuale, în ceea ce ei practică, există această contopire cu veșmântul. Și sunt două obiecte în expoziție care merg acolo, în sensul că există costum viu care se poartă, este vorba de mantia pe care o poartă doamnele la coride sau la nunți. Este acel voal de dantelă foarte frumos, de obicei plasat din generație în generație, brodat de mână în mod tradițional. Mantia este un minunat atribut al femeii spaniole și apare desigur în pictura spaniolă într-un loc unde mi se pare foarte flatant pentru o doamnă purtând mantia, la Goya. Și una dintre preferatele mele este pălăria care vorbește despre Codex Beatus, absolut senzațional ilustrat, și ceea ce m-a atins în această carte despre Apocalipsă, despre ce se întâmplă după. Este o carte din 760. Apocalipsa nu s-a întâmplat la 800, dar ei au încercat să-și imagineze lumea după Apocalipsă și, ei bine, deși orașele lipsesc, pandemia a trecut, pandemia lor, pălăriile nu lipsesc și sunt vizibile, sunt mari, sunt extravagante.
Omul este o ființă creativă, iar fiecare act de creativitate este o răfuială a lui cu dezordinea la care tinde universul. Despre găsirea esenței în creativitate și inspirație, așa cum apare în cartea The Meaning in the Making, aflăm de la autorul ei, britanicul Sean Tucker. Cartea se adresează tuturor oamenilor creativi, indiferent de artele vizuale în care profesează. Un interviu de Andreea Duță.
In your book, The Meaning in the Making, you wanted to write about the why and how behind the human need to create. You also said in one of the chapters that you didn't want to write a how-to book, but you wanted to write the book you would have wanted to read. I'd like to ask you more about the why behind your making You're making photography, videos for YouTube, and writing a non-traditional book on creativity.
In my 20s, I used to work in the church, actually, in South Africa. So I worked amongst youth and teenagers and young adults mostly, and then also in sort of poverty outreach in the community. I wasn't a very traditional pastor, but you know, it was a lot of youth work and that kind of thing. And so I really used to love standing up on a Sunday and speaking to those young people, trying to inspire them to see their lives a bit better, to get a bit more of a handle on who they were, and to tweak things so that they would be happier and more fulfilled. And I suppose when I left the church and then moved into photography as a career, I missed that. I missed doing that for people. And so I was always trying to find a way to kind of come back around to that really meaningful stuff. So specifically getting into video, starting something on YouTube, was me trying to find a way to get back to talking to people, to get them to sort of think about their lives and how to change things so they'd be a bit happier and more fulfilled. And because now I was in this world of photography and filmmaking, I thought, let the subject be about photography. But even in the trailer on my channel, I think I say that I'm not just going to give you tutorials on this. It's not going to be how to. I want to talk more about why you would take a photograph than how, because loads of people are giving you tutorials about how to use your camera better or what shutter speed to use and all this. There's a ton of information about there, but not enough people in my mind were talking about why would you take a picture in the first place? Why would you point your camera at that subject matter? Why is that important to you? And then just things that had nothing to do with photography specifically, things like how do you deal with when you just feel stuck and you don't have ideas and you're uninspired and you hit creative block? Or how do you deal with creative jealousy? Or what do you do when you're in between projects and liminal spaces? Things that apply not just to photographers, but to anyone who makes anything.
You said, and I quote, "On this journey, we need a creative philosophy which will help us find our voice, discover our message, deal with the responses to our work, maintain inspiration, and stay mentally healthy and motivated creators as we strive to find the meaning in the making." Why do you think that human beings are driven to make in the first place?
Human beings love making things because we feel that history is moving. That's the trajectory of history towards disorder. And every time we make something, it's in defiance of that movement towards disorder. We're making order. We're creating small things that show order, and we're pulling order back away from this slip towards chaos or disorder. And I think it's like a very kind of meta psychology. It's something that applies to human beings across the planet. And I think it's very intuitive, but I think we love to pull order out of chaos in little ways. So you could be someone who writes. Every time you sit down and type something and create a paragraph that makes sense and communicates something, it brings a bit of order to the chaos. If you paint something, you choose complementary colors that make sense on a canvas to convey something that you've seen that meant something to you. You're creating order out of the chaos of a paint box. As a photographer, I compose things in a frame. There's chaos around me when I look at life. Like everything doesn't make sense compositionally. I have to choose where to place elements in a frame to bring a bit of order to the chaos so that someone who looks at my image, it makes sense to them when they look at it. So I think in small ways, we're all trying to pull little bits of order out of the chaos. And that's what making is, I would suggest.
How could an artist overcome creative blocks?
I think that inspiration is a choice. And I think it's a choice to get up off the sofa or the couch and to pick up a camera and to take photographs, even if I don't feel like it. I think it's a mistake to think that the best art gets made on good days. I think the best art gets made out of great pain and great difficulty. And there's a whole chapter I have in the book just called Shadows, where I talk about the fact that life is always going to be highlights and shadows, light and dark. It's always going to be that. But if we don't learn to be present to the difficult times that we go through and learn how to use whatever our creative medium is, whatever the thing is we do, and be present to the pain of a current situation, like what we're going through with this pandemic at the moment, and communicate that. If we only make on good days, our art becomes a little bit one note. It's a little bit fake positive. It's a little bit sweet and saccharine. It doesn't have the depth of all of human experience.
What are the greatest enemies of creativity?
One of my biggest resistances, one of the things that stops me making is perfectionism, is that I want everything to be perfect before I show the world. And sometimes I want to be able to guarantee that it will be perfect even before I start making it. And the problem with that is I can never guarantee that, because even if I think it's great, the rest of the world might disagree with me and say that it's not. And perfectionism is always about fear. It's always about fear that I'm not going to get the response to my work that I really want. And that kills creativity for a lot of artists, I think, because they're afraid that their work won't be seen as brilliant by everybody. They don't want to start. And so they stay at home and they don't do anything because they can't guarantee. It's like a need to control the outcomes, and we can't do that. So I think for me, one of the biggest things I have to do is get over my need to guarantee outcomes and just to make the very best work I can manage today and let go of the results, to make it anyway, to release it into the world anyway, to share it anyway, even if I'm afraid of what people will think about it. And that's hard. That's something you have to do by choice over and over and over again. And sometimes people will like it and sometimes people won't. Sometimes it will feel good. Sometimes you'll feel bad. But if you manage to do it again and again, you'll put more work out into the world. And I think that's the only way to get better as an artist, is by making a lot and showing the world what you're making. Henri Cartier-Bresson was a famous French street photographer, and he had a mantra for photographers, and he used to just say, your first 10,000 photographs are your worst, which meant that you have to take 10,000 bad photographs before you start taking good ones. So if I'm a perfectionist and I go, well, I don't want to yet because I'm not sure I'm good enough, I'm delaying taking those 10,000 photographs and keeping myself a beginner much longer, instead of going out and making as much as I can, being brave enough to show the world even if they don't get it, or even if I'm not very good yet, so that I can get through the bad stuff to get to the good stuff. Because I really think the only way to become a good artist is to make a lot and often. Self-awareness is very important in assessing how well you're doing and where you are on your journey. Having people who really know about whatever subject you're engaged with, critiquing your work and giving you their opinion, not the general opinion on the internet, because almost everyone on the internet doesn't know what they're talking about. For me, it would be going and finding really, really good photographers that I respect and showing them my work and saying, what do you think? And hearing their opinion, I take that a lot more as a sign about where I am on a journey than just the general noise that the internet creates. It's not a reliable indicator. Too many artists, any sort of artists who share their work online, have this expectation that the social media score, the number of likes, like you just said, or the number of people who follow is an indicator of how well they're doing as an artist, but it's not. Carl Jung talked about these two halves of the day, the morning and the afternoon, and it being split in the middle by noon. And he basically said that in the morning, psychologically, because this is a psychological theory first, that in the morning we kind of build our ego. We work out who we are as people. We work out what we believe about life, what our politics are, where we want to live, what sort of job we want, who we want our partner to be, all those things. We're trying to construct a person that has all these beliefs and values. And that's the work of the morning. So in our 20s and 30s, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build a human being that we like. And he says what often happens is that we get to a noon point where he was the first to talk about the midlife crisis. At that point, you have a choice. Either at that midlife crisis point, at that noon point, you decide, okay, so I need to change some things, because some of the ways that some of the things that I built about myself I don't like, I want to adjust. And we have to be brave enough to say, I've made some mistakes. I don't like this about myself. I'm going to change that. I don't like these values that I have. I'm going to switch those. Or what some people do is they just go into denial. And then he talks about those who move through to the afternoon of life are those who are able to get honest with themselves at that high noon, at that crisis point. And they actually do go inside and they let go of some things that they built. He says that the work of the morning is to build an ego, and the work of the afternoon is to let it go. So in terms of our artist journey, it's the same thing. In the first half of life, we're defining. Like if the psychology is defining the ego, in the first half of our creative journey, we're defining what sort of artist we want to be. We're learning lots of tips and tricks and techniques about how we want to do stuff. And we're we're trying to define that I want my work to look like this or sound like this or taste like this. This is what it is. But then at some point in our creative journey, when we've spent maybe years teaching ourselves all those skills and buying lots of fancy gear, we suddenly sit down one day and we have that noon crisis and we realize, actually, I've done all this work to build this artist that looks and sounds like this, but it's not giving me what I want. It's empty, it's hollow, and I don't like what I've built. And we have a choice then. Either we can let go of some of those tips, tricks, and techniques and start to move through and simplify, or what some people do is they go into denial and they go, no, I'm just going to buy more stuff because I just haven't got the right lens or the right, and they go into this kind of crisis mode, just trying to buy more and deny the crisis point. But the best artists, I think, when they hit that crisis point, they suddenly realize, like, having the fanciest camera gear in the world, in my case, is not going to make me a better photographer. Some of the best photographs in history were taken with the simplest cameras. I have way better cameras than most of those. It's not the camera. It's about simplifying it down and working out what's important to me and what I really want to say. So that's the artists who move through to the afternoon of life, are the ones who take that crisis point where all that stuff that they built in the morning of their journey, and they realize, like, I could start to let a lot of that go and to simplify it down and to make work more meaningful. My street photography still doesn't have a lot of meaning. Like, I'm still on that journey in the morning with the street photography stuff, trying to work out how I'm going to build meaning into it. So that's a long road ahead for me. The portrait photography, I think I'm further along. I think I'm starting to work out how to put meaning into it. But I got to a point where I realized, I'm just taking photographs of attractive people, but there's not a lot of substance in the portraits. And that was that crisis point where I had to decide, how am I going to build more meaning in? So I did a couple of things. One is I went back to Southern Africa, to Namibia, where I started taking portraits with a tribe called the Himba, just to take something completely outside of my context, outside of this kind of model photography, with a tribe that, is so different to me and from another part of the world. And I got feedback saying it wasn't quite that meaning that I wanted, because even though there were far more interesting images, it wasn't connected to me and my story, so I had to go further. So I went back to South Africa and took 3 portraits, very simple portraits of mentors of mine. My dad left home when I was quite young, and there were 3 men in particular who, as I was growing up, sort of stepped into that gap where I didn't have a father and sort of took me on and helped me to grow up. And I was very grateful to them. And I thought that's a good way to celebrate who these men are to me, and to put a lot of meaning into the portraits that I'm making. It's not just about making pretty people look pretty. It's not just about going to the other side of the world and photographing a tribe who are interesting on their own anyway. It's about going to simple subjects, older men in my life, and taking photographs that mean something to me because of who these men are in my story. And that, I think, was the start of building more meaning into my portrait work. And I started to strip things down. I didn't use lots of lights anymore. It was back to one light, one focal length, just a 50mm on a full frame, stripping down all the techniques to make it as simple as possible and to focus on putting as much meaning into the portraits as possible. And I'm just starting a project now in this part of the world here, where I'm going and taking portraits with people. And this will be a project, that will be probably a year or 2, maybe 3 years long. That's kind of a deep dive into work that feels a lot more meaningful, because it's loosely related to my story, and it's hopefully going to be meaningful to the people who live in this part of the world. And it's not just making pretty people look pretty. It's trying to find story and meaning and build that into the images I'm taking.
Doamnelor și domnilor, Vizual la final. Sunt Marius Constantinescu, mă găsiți și pe Facebook și Instagram, iar aici, la Verso Cărturești, pe TVR3 și TVR+.ro, ne revedem săptămâna viitoare la 20 și 30 de minute. Până atunci, priviți în jur!